Imagine a world entirely powered by muscle, wind, and water. A reality completely dictated by the rising and setting of the sun and the changing of the seasons. For thousands of years, that was it. That was the entirety of the human experience. It was a reality that remained virtually unchanged for millennia. But then, literally in the blink of an eye, the whole shebang shattered. In this explainer, we're unpacking a monumental, lightning-fast shift that kicked off in the United Kingdom. A shift that violently disrupted the old world and basically set the blueprint for every single other nation on Earth to transition into the modern era. We're going to dive into the mind-blowing, world-altering progress of the Industrial Revolution, but we also have to examine the very real, very heavy price paid to achieve it. Let's get right into it. So how exactly did quiet, green fields turn into the warring, concrete capitalist world we know today? To really answer this, we have to wrap our heads around just how incredibly abrupt this transition was in the grand scheme of human history. Over the span of just a few decades in the mid-18th century, society made this unprecedented leap from slow-paced agrarian economies reliant on subsistence farming straight into the unstoppable engines of mechanized manufacturing. It was a total top-to-bottom rewiring of how human beings lived, worked, and interacted with the planet itself.
Section 1, Workshop of the World, Britain's Rise. Now, you might be wondering, how did Britain pull this off? Well, this sudden transformation didn't just happen spontaneously. Britain was basically sitting on a geographical and economic powder keg. It was driven by three highly specific elements coming together at exactly the right time. First up, coal. Britain had a massive natural abundance of it, providing an unprecedented, incredibly concentrated energy source. Second, iron. This was the foundational material, essentially providing the indestructible bones for all these new machines. And third, immense colonial wealth pouring in from overseas. This wasn't just cash, it was the essential risk capital that entrepreneurs desperately needed to build these massive factories. Without this exact trifecta, the energy of coal, the skeleton of iron, and the financial lifeblood of empire, modern capitalism literally couldn't have sparked. Section 2, the Age of Innovation, Unprecedented Technological Advancement. The resulting physical shock to the British landscape from all this was profound and entirely permanent. For centuries, traditional agrarian life defined the country. Picture vast, quiet fields stretching out to the horizon. But over the course of just a single generation, the very face of the nation morphed. Mechanized manufacturing took over, and the sky itself physically darkened with soot. Stark, smoky factory skylines began to absolutely dominate the horizon. People who had grown up listening to the wind and birdsong were suddenly surrounded by the relentless, deafening rhythm of industrial machinery. It was like waking up on a different planet. Driving that wild physical change were a handful of ingenious, total game-changer inventions. Take James Hargreaves' spinning jenny, for example. Before this, a worker could spin only one spool of thread at a time, right? Suddenly, boom, they could spin 8, and later on up to 120 simultaneously. Textile production didn't just speed up, it exploded. But the real anchor of this era was James Watt's refinement of the steam engine. By breaking humanity's reliance on the unpredictable forces of wind and water, the steam engine meant that massive, heavy goods could be produced incredibly fast, anywhere, at any time. We were totally untethered from geography. Section 3, the Urban Factory Boom. Because the very nature of work changed, where human beings actually lived had to completely change too. As those old agrarian lifestyles became economically impossible, desperate people flooded into urban centers hunting for reliable factory wages. And the statistics here are just staggering. Manchester, for instance, grew from a modest, relatively quiet town of roughly 18,000 people into a sprawling, chaotic metropolis of over 300,000 in just a few decades. It created an entirely new, deeply crowded urban ecosystem that city planners simply weren't prepared to handle. Step inside those bursting cities, and you'd see the factory floor was radically altering the human experience of time itself. Before this, people worked to the rhythm of the sun and the changing seasons. But the introduction of relentless steam power meant machines never, ever had to sleep. This led directly to the assembly line, breaking complex crafts down into simple, endless, repeatable steps. It birthed the concept of clocking in, of working in rigid shifts to match the tireless rhythm of the machine. It was a massive structural shift from human time to machine time, a reality we still very much live under today. So, what does this all mean? Well, this exact sequence of innovations fundamentally democratized consumption. Think about it. We completely shifted away from skilled artisans making single items by hand over weeks to churning out identical goods on a massive, massive scale. And the true insight here is what this meant for the everyday person. Items that were once exclusively reserved for kings and the ultra-wealthy, like varied complex textiles, certain foods, or specialized tools, suddenly became highly accessible and affordable to the common citizen. But, and this is absolutely crucial to understand, this unprecedented material triumph came at an incredibly devastating human toll. The real people physically fueling this progress were treated as entirely disposable. Factory workers were routinely subjected to 14 to 16-hour workdays. The conditions were deeply hazardous. Factories had zero ventilation, toxic fumes filled the air, and there were absolutely no safety guards on that thundering iron machinery. Perhaps most tragically of all, this era relied heavily on widespread child labor, utilizing small children to crawl under active, unbelievably dangerous looms and gears to clear jams. It often resulted in horrifying injuries.
Section 4. The harsh human cost. Section 5. Rise of social reform. Human beings, however, will only endure so much exploitation before finally pushing back. The undeniable suffering in those early factories directly catalyzed the modern labor movement. Workers, realizing they actually had numbers on their side, began taking immense personal risks, often risking their livelihoods and sometimes their lives, to strike and band together. This birth of early trade unions exerted intense pressure on the government, ultimately forcing the implementation of our very first labor laws. Minimum age requirements and maximum working hours didn't just politely appear. They were bled for and won by these early industrial workers. Concurrently, while the working class fought for survival, the broader social hierarchy of Britain was being completely rewritten. The emergence of factory owners, industrialists, and managers created a powerful new middle class. These individuals weren't born into aristocratic nobility, yet through capitalism, they acquired material wealth and political influence that rivaled the old lords and dukes. The modern concepts of climbing the corporate ladder, having disposable income, and yes, even the invention of the weekend, they all trace their roots straight back to this newly minted, incredibly disruptive demographic. Section 6. A lasting global legacy. The reverberations of this brief, explosive period are deeply embedded in the very foundation of our modern lives. The mass transit and shipping infrastructure we rely on today, born to move industrial goods. Our entire framework of corporate and labor legal systems evolved specifically to manage the complexities of factory work. That industrial influence continues to dictate global economics. And perhaps most critically today, this era sparked our crucial need for environmental awareness. The carbon emissions that began belching from those very first coal-fired steam engines literally initiated the profound climate challenges that our current generation is so urgently trying to solve today. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a really powerful question to consider. How does massive, rapid innovation both empower a society and fundamentally challenge its moral foundations? The Industrial Revolution gave us the modern world for sure, but it stands as a stark reminder of the double-edged sword of unbridled progress. As we stand today on the precipice of our own massive shifts, like the AI and tech revolution, we have to look back at the soot-stained skies of the 18th century and ask ourselves, what price are we willing to pay for the future?